Good morning, and you're very welcome to another Signpost Series webinar on Friday morning, 9:30 as always. And I hope you're all looking forward to the bank holiday weekend ahead. We'll certainly have plenty of shamrock and parades and music to look forward to, and all going well, plenty of Ceol agus crack. And today we have a really interesting and I think a real timely actually presentation this morning. We're going to be discussing encouraging Irish butterflies on farmland. And just, I suppose, to give you a little bit of background, butterflies are very valuable in themselves, but they're also important indicators of health of our environment and climate change. Unfortunately, the decline of butterfly species has been ongoing since around the 1970s and has accelerated in recent years. But I suppose the big question is, what can we as farmers do to help? And we're delighted to be joined today by Jesmond Harding. He's Conservation Ireland Officer with Butterfly Conservation Ireland. Jesmond, good morning.
Good morning, Cathal. Good morning. Good
How,
morning
how,
to your listeners as well.
how are you keeping today?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah,
Looking forward to spring. Looking forward to the brighter days, which we're beginning to get now. So it's lovely. A bit more warmth would be very welcome, but it's just great after a long, fairly dull winter.
yeah, it's bright anyway. About 5 more degrees and we'll be happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're also joined by Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist Catherine Keena, who you all know, who's going to help me out with questions today. Good morning, Catherine. How are you?
Morning, Cathal. Morning, Jesmond.
Yeah.
Morning.
How's life with you, Catherine? All well? Where are you
All
today?
good. Really looking forward to the butterflies. I think they're a group that aren't that hard to distinguish. So I think it's a group, and it's not that big. We'll hear all about that. So it's ones that it's an easy target, I think, to get to know. So
Yeah,
we'll learn more today.
and so visual, and we probably only know
Yes.
half of what we think we know. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
really interesting. Jesmond, and we're delighted to have you today. Catherine is telling me a lot about you, and looking forward to the presentation. But can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, maybe where you are and what you're about?
I live about 3.5 miles north of Maynooth, just inside the Maynooth Kildare border. It's pretty standard Meath pasture land, great for finishing cattle. Um, Not hugely exciting grasslands for biodiversity, but very good hedgerows actually, and good hedge margins as well. And some of the hedge banks are very rich in wildflowers. So the county does have its attractions. Um, the the Kildare is wilder because you have a lot of the bogs, and there are extensive areas of unfarmed land, especially in the northwest and south of the county. So, and the canals are good wildlife corridors as well. So there's plenty to see in both counties, and the coast in Meath is spectacularly good. It really is. They're wonderful habitats there. They're annexed and special area conservation habitats. So there's some wonderful places at this time of the year, especially with the warmer days in April and May, to get out and have a look at what's going on in the countryside and on the farm as well.
You're not in the books with Board Falkshire in there yet. So there'll be people booking visits up there
Yeah,
shortly.
yeah.
Yeah. Just to remind everybody today that we're going to be recording today's session, and please don't forget to submit your questions all the way through. We have good speaker and Catherine really good on questions, so put them in and we'll get through as many as we can. Jesmond, sure, if you want, you can get your slides ready there now to put
Yeah,
up,
okay.
and I just want to remind everybody that just that there is a podcast version of the Signpost Series webinar, and it's also available on the Teagasc website if you watch it again. So plenty of opportunity to listen to it on the move or wherever you're doing your business or your farming. So, and available on podcast platforms as well. So you're ready to go. That looks good, Jesmond. So we'll
That's
knock off our cameras and you can take us through it. Thanks a million.
Thanks very much, Cathal. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. And what I'm going to do today, I'm going to give you a general overview of key butterfly habitats on farmland and sympathetic management of those habitats. And then I'm going to follow with details about how the management of these areas affect key selected species as exemplars, as examples of what you're doing on your land. So the first three slides are just a general overview. So I'm going to go through that now with you, and the text is actually on the slide. So butterflies need specific conditions. So just to say what I mean by butterflies. By butterflies, I'm using it generically to include moths as well. Now, we have 35 butterfly species in Ireland. Depending on who you talk to, we have between 1,005 moths and 1,567 moths. So if you take the upper figure of 1,567, moths plus the 35 butterflies, they represent a considerable proportion of our native biodiversity. And worldwide, butterflies and moths together constitute between 9 and 10% of all life forms on the planet. So they are a very important group in terms of ecosystem functioning, in terms of the relationship with plants and other animals, and their role in pollination and so on. So they're a very important group. Their habitats often require management. The idea of passive management, where you just put a fence around a nice bit of habitat and leave it alone, that is highly flawed in this part of the world. It doesn't work. So key interventions for management are livestock grazing and scrub control in most of the farmland habitats. And the best areas are large, unpolluted, unfertilized, containing a range of habitat types. And I'll refer to that more as I go on through the presentation. Now, I seem not to be, oh, hold on, sorry about that. Okay, next slide. So this is hay meadow management. Now, there aren't too many hay meadows nowadays, unfortunately, especially since the 3 wet summers in the mid-1980s, which are etched in the memory of people living at that time and still alive today. In a meadow, you leave it uncut from May to September, graze lightly in summer, and cut in a 10-centimeter setting in September. You remove the cuttings, but not immediately. Leave them a few days on the surface, and then remove them and use a landscape raker to scarify the soil. The purpose of that is to allow seed to meet bare soil. So you're not plowing it up, you're just using the raker to scarify or scratch and disturb the soil. You leave some patches uncut, especially near a south or west facing hedge, and grow native plants from native sources only. They'll often be present there anyway. You won't need to bring them in or introduce them. So next slide is hedge, scrub, and wood management. So hedgerow and wood I'm talking about native trees and native shrubs from Irish sources only, by which I mean seed saved in Ireland, which is better than, say, native oak but sourced in France. So a hedge running from east to west will have sun all day. So there are my hedge actually my hedge has a north and a south side. So the north side really doesn't get very much sun, but the south side does. So keep your hedge under 2 meters, cut in an A shape, preferably in February when the birds have eaten the fruit, and allow some trees to mature, and I'll come back to that. Rotational cutting, 1/3 per year. Now, that's very important. To do 1/3 of the hedge in a year, not all of the hedges in 1 year and leave them for the next 2. And I'll come back to that later. If possible, if you're planting hedges, plant on a raised bank sown with wood edge flora, or just let the flora find its way there. Now, hedgerows, I have a lot of information about this slide. This is a hedgerow near me, typical track through farmland. It's actually in County Meath, and you can see it's warm and sunny, and there's cow parsley and stitchwort, and there's primrose earlier in the year on that hedge, and it's bathed in sunlight. There's lots of wild grasses used by meadow brown, ringlet, specklewood butterflies, so it's a lovely little haven of warmth for them. Now, a hedgerow, by that I mean a linear feature with closely planted bushes or trees, which when you clip them, they form a dense barrier. I'm also including in that definition the untilled adjoining extended field margin, even if it's just 1 meter, which would add enormously to the biodiversity of the hedgerow. Now, hedgerows are crucial for biodiversity. Anyone flying above Ireland in an aircraft can see they're a dominant feature in the Irish landscape. But because, depending on who you speak to, there are between 450,000 kilometres to 689,000 kilometres of hedgerow in Ireland. 65% of our butterflies use hedges. And as a UK study in 2012 found that hedgerow trees and extended field margins locally increased the number of the larger moth species, also known as macro moths. It didn't increase their abundance, but increased the number of species. And they actually found that species richness and abundance wasn't affected by intensive farming, which they measured by the amount of arable land in the landscape. And both the mobile and less mobile larger moths did better when the extended width margins and hedgerow trees were present. So increasing the density of hedgerows and trees was recommended to lessen the effects of intensive agriculture. Now, the study also underlined the importance of leaving trees in your hedgerow. They said the trees had a disproportionate effect on ecosystem functioning, given the small area occupied by any individual tree. So they had a disproportionately positive effect on ecosystem functioning, given the size of the trees and the number of them. So the study found the link between increased moth populations and ecosystem functioning. In other words, the higher moth abundance and species richness improves biological community functioning. Now, why is this? It's because moths are associated with higher pollinator success, which benefits crops and animals, and moths are a very important prey base for a range of species, like bats, for example. A study carried out in 2016 found that moths use hedges, and so do bats, use hedges as flight paths. So they're very, very important, not just for food, because there are a lot of hedgerow trees and shrubs are used as breeding plants for moths and butterflies, but they're also important for the shelter, and they help moths and animals move through a landscape. So they're very, very important. Now, scrub and woodland. You can see here, this photograph was taken in Offaly. Allow some areas to develop scrub, which basically is a tree that's below 5 meters, and woodland. This contains a series. This actually area here is grazed by cattle, and it's warm, sheltered, and rich in butterflies and moths. So if you have an area you can allow that to happen in, it's great. And livestock actually love it. You can see that the tracks are they've worn through it. Livestock love those areas because they're sheltered and warm, and it relaxes them as well. Now, the next slide here, you have spring flowers in an area cleared of hazel scrub. Very often when you clear scrub, herbs respond swiftly to the increased availability of light. So you get a burst, especially in the first couple of years after scrub is cleared. And by cleared, I actually do mean cleared. I don't mean just controlled. But don't do it on a patchwork basis. Don't clear huge amounts of scrub. Clear patches of it. And that really brings it. You see the lovely cowslips here. The boost of light really sees an explosion of flora. Now, the next slide shows a little bit of poaching by cattle on dry soil. What poaching does is it encourages germination of larval food plants for butterflies and moths. It creates warm microclimates because bare soil heats up quicker than vegetated soil. And it helps adults bask because all butterflies are cold-blooded, and moths and all invertebrates, insects are. So they need direct heat from the sun to become active because they don't generate body heat from food like we do. So those little bare patches are excellent. So a little bit of poaching can be really beneficial for our butterfly and moth populations on farmland. One of the areas that has really been neglected on farms, and people generally tend to fill them in, is ponds. I saw a pond recently that was created in a Kildare farm, and the biodiversity attracted within a year was absolutely incredible. So creating a pond or wetland, but not in a dip. If you put a pond in a dip where the land is naturally sloping, you'll tend to get nutrient washing into it. You don't want that. So have shallow edges and a deeper center, place in full sun, not south of a hedge or wood because you don't want it too shaded. Stock the pond with native plants grown from Irish seed, or allow the pond to develop plant life naturally, which is probably even better. And dredge every few years if choking with vegetation, because ponds eventually infill naturally. And leave dredge material beside the pond for a few days before removal to allow the creatures to get back into the pond. And ponds add an enormous dimension to any area. for wildlife. They really do. It's like it's like putting the stage in a theater. It's that important. The amount of wildlife standing water creates is phenomenal. So it's a wonderful thing if you can do it. Um, it would need to be excavated with a digger. Get the digger to compact the soil and let it flood naturally. And like a 1 acre pond with adjoining marsh, in other words, saturated ground with marshland plants, will attract a huge range of biodiversity. In terms of management, this photograph was taken in Roscommon. You can see the buttercups and the ragged robin, beautiful plants. Um, no drainage. No, if you have marshland, no drainage. Don't apply herbicide, slurry, or fertilizer. Summer grazing only. And there are several wetland butterflies and moths there, like orange tip butterfly, green veined white, marsh artillery if you're lucky, and the wainscot moths and others. Garden carpet as well. The range of species will love those habitats. Now, the next slide looks at habitat management in a little more detail. So we're looking at management of scrub and grassland for 5 butterfly species that are quite rare: brown hairstreak, wood white, pearl border fritillary, dark green fritillary, and marsh fritillary. These are all quite scarce species. And you can see the beautiful floral display there that was taken in Fahey North near the Burn Perfumery in North Clare. This is a brown hairstreak butterfly. It's sitting on bracken. It's found in scrub, hedges, wood edges in Clare, Galway, Mayo, and very locally in West Tipperary. So there it is. There's the underside of that butterfly. It's a remarkably tame butterfly. It's the way some species, and you don't get near them. They belt it the minute they see you. This butterfly is really, really tame. And in fact, in cool weather, if you lick the top of your finger and put your finger underneath it, it'll actually crawl onto your finger and start probing your skin for mineral salts. And the sweat in your skin, it loves that. So they're a really tame butterfly. They're quite scarce in Ireland. And for many years there was doubt about whether it occurred here at all. But in 1980, a man named Tom Tallman, he went on a recce on his own. He went around looking for eggs, because the egg is easier to find than the adult, believe it or not. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. So, next slide. Now, this slide here shows the brown hairstreak macro habitat. Now, I'm going to explain what macro habitat is. Macro habitat is the general habitat of a butterfly or any animal. So it includes a range of conditions. That's what a macro habitat is. It includes a range of conditions, and they will use various parts of that habitat. So a macro habitat or macro site is a habitat of sufficient extent to present considerable variation in the environment. It contains different ecological niches and supports a large and usually complex flora and fauna. So, for example, a woodland, which will have different niches in it, a grassland, which will have different sward heights and different niches, a pond or a bog or a sand dune system, etc. Those are macro habitats. Macro means the larger habitat. So the brown hairstreak's macro habitat is naturally rich soil scrub growing on naturally rich soil, not enriched or improved, but naturally rich soil scrub, tall herb forest clearings. That's its natural macro habitat. So you can see from the next slide here, there's the adult butterfly's macro habitat, sheltered, usually south-facing, untrimmed scrub with a range of heights. And just at the front of the slide, at the bottom, you can see blackthorn here, which is the larval food plant. Now, slide 15 shows its egg on blackthorn. Now, this is why it's the easiest life form stage of that species to find. The egg is white and it's on dark blackthorn twigs, especially at junctions between 2-year-old growth and 1-year-old growth. That's typically where they're laid. In other words, those eggs are laid at the outer edge of a hedge or area of scrub. So that's why it's very important in terms of how you manage your hedgerows. That's why I mentioned cutting 1/3 of your hedge or scrub in any 1 year. Now, this isn't the only species that breeds on hedges or scrubs and leaves its eggs to overwinter. So, a study by Berwitz and Mark in 2010, they reported that annual mechanical cutting of hedgerows removes 80 to 99% of brown hairstreak eggs, and essentially wipes it out completely. So, a rotational cutting system that involves cutting 1/3 of the hedges in an area each winter resulted in the butterfly's long-term survival. So this has been demonstrated by the research. And even more serious is removal of hedgerows by farmers who want to increase field sizes. That's even more worrying. Now, there's the larva there, and it's feeding on the blackthorn. Another rare species is the wood white, very rare species there. It's mainly found in North Clare around Limestone and Galway and Lough Corrib. Its habitat, it likes open scrub and limestone, grassy forest clearings and limestone. And the adult microsite is scrub, herb-rich, open, medium height sward with a tangle of vegetation. That's what it particularly likes. You can see it here. That's what it likes. So the wilder areas like that. You can see so that's actually the larval microsite. So if you have a very clean farm with everything trimmed, you lose what's called small scale diversity in the landscape, and that species and many others can't survive under those conditions. So you really need a little bit of roughness. There's the marsh tillery, our only legally protected insect, protected under the Habitats Directive. You're not supposed to destroy its habitat. It has legal protection. Even habitats that are not occupied by a breeding colony at the time, because the colonies move around in a landscape, that can't be destroyed either. So that's on purple moorgrass. It's scattered throughout a lot of the country and scarcest in the east, southeast, south, and northeast. But there are certainly populations of this species on farmland. In fact, there are populations of all these rare species on farmland. So if you look at its microsite there, or its macro habitat, that's showing wet grassland and heath. You also get on raised and blanket bogs on the edges, especially limestone pavement, dune slacks, marsh, fen, macar, and eskers. Most commonly occurs on farmland containing wet grassland, marsh, and fen, grazed by cattle. Now, if you look at the sward here, it has a lumpy profile. So it's kind of, this undulating sward. So you never use sheep or high numbers of horses, because unselective grazers create a uniform sward profile. So you need small patches of scattered scrub, small patches of scattered scrub are beneficial but need to be controlled. So no drainage, mowing, slurry fertilizer, or herbicide. So, for example, in Milltown Malbay in Clare between 2016 and 2018, 3 years, a site was monitored by Penny Bartlett from National Park and Wildlife Service, and she found between 180 and 260 larval webs each year. Following slurry application on the site, it went from 180 to 260 larval webs to 2. So it's devastating. It really is. So it's really important. About stocking rates, we're talking about cattle here, grazing being by far the best. It shouldn't exceed 0.2 to 0.3 livestock units per hectare per year. Now, if you're seasonally grazing it, roughly 1 cow per hectare for 3 months per year is recommended, and grazing animals should be removed if the drier areas become shorter than 8 centimeters or the ground becomes too wet. On neglected sites where more grass has become dense, heavy grazing by cattle can restore the grassland where the site's been neglected. So there's its microsite there with the food plant. The sward is usually 4 to 10 inches, and it usually has to have at least a 25% density of this food plant, which is Devil's Bit scabious. And again, you can see the next slide here. the larval microsite containing a mixture of tall and short vegetation. So you get these little heat pockets. And again, there's the larvae there feeding on the food plant. And in spring, you can see the microsite there. In spring, the larvae are black, so they're better color for absorbing direct sunlight, and they're basking on dead, dry leaf litter. Dry, dead vegetation is crucial for that species. They have to heat up. So they have to get a body temperature about 35 Celsius for digestion. And by basking on that manner together, communally on dry vegetation, they can become 20 Celsius warmer than their surroundings, which is actually vital for them. Moving swiftly on, so you've the chainsaw here, and if you look just below the chainsaw, you'll see the marsh-shillery caterpillars. It looks an incongruous image, but you need to control scrub because shading is disastrous for that species. It actually wipes it out. Even if the habitat is still there, if it's shaded, they're gone. Very rare butterfly, pearl-bordered fritillary, only in the Burren in North Clare and southwest Galway. There he is on bugle. See the pearl markings at the outer side of the wings. There's its macro habitat, grassy clearings in scrub and woodland and dry, unimproved calcareous or limestone grassland. So that habitat is actually grazed throughout the winter and spring with occasional scrub clearance, which suits it very well. There's the microsite, violets, which heart-shaped leaves with dry, dead leaf litter, nice, warm, sheltered microclimate. And it uses the leaf litter, actually, the caterpillar uses the leaf litter to hibernate in. There's where it's been feeding. You can see the marks taken, the little nicks taken out of the leaves. And that's what I was talking about, a little bit of untidiness. The leaf litter buildup is very, very good. A lot of species hibernate in dry leaf litter. And there's another shot of it there. And they use them for concealment. The caterpillars of the pearl-bordered fritillary use that leaf litter for basking, concealment, and overwintering. Now, here's a magnificent butterfly, dark green fritillary, very fast, very powerful, flies a bit like a swallow with twists and turns, a dramatic flyer, battles against gale force winds. It's an incredible sight on the wing. There's its underside there, lovely. Those marks are silvery. They're actually little mini mirrors. They reflect the vegetation color in which it roosts, so it's great for hiding. And there it is on red clover there, favorite source of nectar. There's its macro habitat, unimproved dry calcareous grassland with scrub, but also it occurs on a lot of other habitat types as well, like dune systems and so on. There's its there's the larval macrosite. It also uses areas that pearl-bordered fritillary will also use. Again, the violets just here, growing up against the scrub, and you see the stone beside it, which has a warming effect. So it's very often species like bare ground or stone near their breeding site. Like, for example, a hedge bank would do something similar. Habitat management, here you can see where there's been a fresh clearing made in the scrub. You can see the cut material. Leaving the cut material there is very good because there are moth species, for example, that the larvae only feed on dead wood. So that fresh clearing opens up the breeding habitat for other species as well, like wood white, pearl-bordered fritillary, silverwash fritillary, and dingy skipper. So you can see the violets here. Sorry, that's just gone. You can see violets here growing vigorously. These were growing vigorously in a fresh clearing and nibbled at by dark green fritillary, silverwash fritillary, and pearl-bordered fritillary. So 3 of the 4 Irish fritillaries feed on common dog violet. There you can see the cut material there, and that was cut in the Burren. And there is the area, a sunny ride, cleared ride view from the south. Avoid very extensive scrub clearing. Scrub is vital to create the warm microclimate shelter and habitats for Lepidoptera. So in terms of habitat management, clearings and scrub graze extensively throughout the year, produces low open flower-rich sward favored by most of the butterfly species that found, for example, in the Burren and other places like southwest Donegal, for example. Grazing and poaching of scrub areas induces fresh growth and germination of plants like common dog violet and are probably essential for some species. Some species wouldn't exist without that management. If you abandon that land, scrub would take over and those butterflies would be lost. So you're not talking about abandoning farming. You're not talking about that. You're talking about managing sympathetically and certainly no chemicals. Periodic scrub control creates a patchwork of clearings on limestone pavement, and it's likely to be vital for those species to survive. So scrub clearing exposes violets to sunlight, making them suitable for breeding. And if you look at the next slide, taller sward can become dense and shade out larval food plants. So a site containing a range of sward heights benefits a range of species. Like, for example, you can just see at the bottom where it says marsh tillery, there's actually dark green fertility here about to roost in the taller sward. So patches of taller sward are also important. Dark green fertility can actually forecast the weather. They know when it's going to rain. They actually fly from areas of short sward, taller sward, and grassland in order to roost and to take shelter. So you do need a range of conditions. Uniformity is bad. Now, next slide here. You can see what's happened here. This is overgrazed, and it also lacks dry, dead grass material needed, and the little hummocks and the undulating sward needed by marsh tillery for breeding. The marsh tillery's food plant is there, but the dry, dead, senescent leaf litter isn't. That's why it's not there. So you actually need those conditions in order to maintain populations of our rarer species. So here you have grassland habitat management. You see the cattle on it. This is an organic farm in North Clare. So this is extensively grazed and sporadically grazed as well by cattle, and it maintains high quality habitat and vital for the survival of many butterfly species. Grassland management also requires periodic scrub control, leaving mainly an open sward with scattered scrub. The aim of scrub control and light grazing is to create a patchwork of short and tall sward or grassland with patches of scrub, and this creates conditions that suit a range of species. Light poaching provides gaps for germination and for basking, and grazing and poaching creates nutritious regrowth of plants high in nitrogen, which is essential for larval development. And you can see in the next slide a bit of scrub carrot control going on there, and these are volunteers from the Burn BO Trust, and they maintain that habitat with the permission of the farmer. So if I'm leaving you with one takeaway from today, the loss of small-scale diversity in the landscape is a major problem. So those little areas where you tread lightly, that you didn't graze too heavily, you let a bit of scrub, patches of bramble, hawthorn invade it every now and then. You might control it lightly, but essentially, the hare's corner idea, essentially. So loss of small-scale diversity in the landscape really has reduced a lot of our species, and nature needs some areas to survive. There's a field near me that was covered in cuckoo flower. The farmer went in a single application of herbicide and fertilizer, and it removed every single cuckoo flower and almost every single common sorrel from the field. And I checked that field numerous times over the following 2 years. I didn't see a single orange-tip butterfly or a single small copper butterfly. That's the damage that can be done by one event. So that's the end of the presentation. I know I rattled through a lot of slides and there's a lot of information there. So I hope that you took something from it. And this closing slide has a lovely pearl border fertility in the burn. It even has blue eyes. So what more do you want?
Yeah, Jesmond, that was excellent. Really, really good. The one thing that struck me from very early on in your presentation is there is so much to learn as a farmer. There's so much to learn to get it done right, I suppose. And I suppose the first question is, I'm from a farmer background, and I know a good bit about biodiversity, but I don't know it all, and there's lots I didn't know today. Where can I go to get that information?
That's a very good question. The National Biodiversity Data Centre produce a series of management guides for individual butterfly species, and they're happy to email those to you. So there's one for the marsh tillery, for example. There's one for the small heath. There are a number of other species they cover as well, and they're happy to send them to you. They can email you the PDF. Those are very, very good. Butterfly Conservation Ireland, if you email us with specific questions at conservation.butterfly@gmail.com, we're delighted to take your queries. Now we can only take so many, but we will advise, especially if you tell us about, if you've moisture in your land and you're looking for advice on stocking rates or grazing regimes, we're happy to talk to you about that.
Yeah, and you made a really highly important point at the end, and halfway through, in fact, you said that a lot of what you're trying to achieve is very reliant on farmers carrying out
It is.
farming, and if the farmer doesn't farm the land and it overgrows, that it's a problem. So that's really
Yeah.
important, but it has to be done in the correct way, the correct manner. But the last point you made was about that field that you talked about that was kind of completely destroyed and brought back into productive farming, and this is something that's coming across our table very fast at the moment, because there's a bit of a grab for land because of different regulation for different reasons. Are you concerned about that, and are we doing enough to I suppose support or pay farmers to hold those habitats?
I am concerned about intensification processes, because they certainly do remove habitat. There's no question about that. And that field still hasn't produced the species that were common there, like green vein white, orange tip. Actually, it's important to note, Cathal, there'll be an Atlas of Irish butterflies published later this year. It's being launched on the 2nd of May, and that will contain a lot of details in relation to what's happened to our butterfly populations between 2010 and 2021. And what's quite alarming is that some of our commonest species, and by which I mean found throughout the country and on farms throughout the country, are in the steepest decline. In other words, it's not the habitat specialists that live only in the Burren or around Lough Corrib. The biggest declines have been noted in our common garden, common farmland butterflies, which means we're degrading the landscape on a monumental general scale. That's what worries me. And I would say a lot of that isn't climate change, it's habitat change, it's intensification processes. Like if you're wiping out the food plant with one dose of herbicide, if you're wiping out everything, the butterfly is not going to be there. You're just literally wiping out an entire population. So that intensification is a huge problem, not just in Ireland, especially across in Britain and across Northern Europe as well. It's not just an Irish issue.
Yeah, it's trying to find that sweet spot between intensification and holding our habitats as well. And look,
Yeah.
that's a regulatory issue, I suppose. I'm sure there's lots of cattle farmers out there that to be happy to have, 5 less cattle if they were getting paid to maintain, a habitat, and they weren't losing money.
And I think
because
that's fair. I think farmers need to be encouraged and need to be supported and need to be incentivized to manage the land in a way that protects biodiversity. But there are things farmers can do that they really shouldn't need to be paid to do. So, for example, leaving the 1 meter strip at the edge of the hedge, which is difficult to get to anyway in terms of a lot of machinery, leaving that uncultivated and try to make sure nothing sprays onto it. Even that has proven to protect countryside moth and butterfly populations. Even that simple measure of having the 1 to 2 meter strip at the edge of the hedge and cutting the hedge once every 3 years. Or sorry, not once every 3 years, 1/3 every year. Even that simple measure was proven in the UK to maintain moth populations and to maintain and increase actually the species of macro moth. There are lots of moths called micro moths. They weren't studied, they weren't considered for the study, but I would say it includes them too.
Yeah. One more lighter question for you before we head to Catherine. Does the poor old moth get a bad rep? You have
Yes,
lots
it
of lovely
does.
pictures of the butterfly.
Yes, it does. I mean, there are some really, really beautiful moths. I mean, for the purposes of this presentation, I was asked to do butterflies, so that's what I've done. But there's some gorgeous, gorgeous moth species. I mean, the garden tiger is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. The burn green is stunning. Like the wood tiger is another beautiful moth. There are some really lovely ones, and actually, they're wasted on us because they fly. Their colors are wasted because they fly at night. Like 95% of our moths are nocturnal. Of our 1,500 odd moth species, only 2 feed on clothes. 2 of them. And they're quite rare, and they're mostly found in the east of the country. All the others feed on plants, and some of them feed on dead plants, and some of them feed on dead leaves. Like there's a moth called the fanfoot. That caterpillar feeds on decaying leaf litter. So, and some moths actually live in some moth larvae. Like I'm talking about some of the micro moths, for example. They actually live in water. They're aquatic. So they occupy the range of environmental niches. Some of them live in, like the red-necked footman moth. They live at the tops of trees and feed on lichens. So the range of niches they occupy is enormous. And to have a world where everything's bland is just so dull for everybody. I mean, you can't wonder why there are no swallows in your farm anymore. If you're dosing your land with fertilizer every year, the sward is flat and green, and there's nothing in your farm except docks, nettles, and common dandelion. There's nothing wrong with docks, nettles, and common dandelion, but there is something wrong with they're the only plants you've got. So, in terms of biodiversity, it's like saying to a human being, we're going to do a Howard Hughes. You're going to eat chicken soup for the rest of your life. It's not a healthy way to live. Some butterflies, for example, the common speckled, which is the most recorded butterfly in Ireland, it breeds on grasses at the edge of a hedge, but the adult feeds on nectar, especially bramble, and the adult mates very high up in trees. So it needs more than one habitat type in close proximity for its survival. That's my point about loss of small-scale diversity in the landscape.
Yeah. Loads of questions, Catherine, coming through.
Yeah, but I think, Cathal, we've got ourselves another webinar on moths only.
I think we do.
Just a couple of comments, very positive comments, hugely positive comments. Just on the management, first of all, again, you have such wisdom in there that, you know, we're trying to promote as well. Uniformity is bad, dead wood is good, all these. And there's a lot of questions coming back to what Cathal asked there, where is the information available? And I think we've just agreed, myself and yourself, we'll do an article after this, just literally on today's, and we'll put it on the Teagasc website and you can use it. Don't forget that this is the recording will be available and in a podcast. So this particular presentation will be well out there in whichever format you want to do. And just to remind people to put in their questions into the chat. Now, having given you that bit of a break, Jesmond, I have a few quick fire questions for you because we've lots of questions coming in. Some specific ones that you can be helpful to is here. You mentioned poaching helps germination of larval food plants. Can you define what larval food plants are and their importance?
Larval food plants are food. The growth stage in a butterfly or moth is the caterpillar. It's the only life cycle stage that actually grows. The egg doesn't grow, the pupa and adult don't grow. Only the caterpillar grows. So it's the sensitive stage. It's a very sensitive stage in the life cycle because it has to grow. So, for example, an area that's poached and it's reasonably dry will often support plants like common bird's foot trefoil. Common bird's foot trefoil is it's not toxic. Livestock will happily graze it. It's great nectar source, but it's used by the woodwhite, the cryptid woodwhite, common blue, and green hairstreak, and a number of moth species for breeding. They lay their eggs on that plant. So that plant loves disturbed areas. Sorry, Catherine, just to come back, on my book, the Irish Butterfly book, also contains habitat management advice. So if anyone's interested in that, they can look it up online and get in touch with me. Other food plants
and it has fantastic photos of all for an ID guide. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Your book.
Thanks very much, Catherine.
Because I think they're a group that people can get to grips with.
Oh,
Bees are more difficult. Butterflies, if you see them, they're good. Sorry,
and they're visible.
Yeah,
they're large and visible and conspicuous, and you can. I mean, I know a few people who have gone a little safari around Ireland to see all 35 species in 1 year. And a number of them have done it. Like it's doable. There's a little bit of traveling involved with some of the scarcer and more range limited ones, but they've all done it. And all of the Irish butterflies, all of them will live on farms. Every one of them. For example, there's one species that's completely arboreal. In other words, tree dwelling, and that's the purple hairstreak. That occurs in the Oakwood and the Phoenix Park, for example. Like it's once the oaks are there, it's not fussy. So all of our species live on farms. I mean, most of the photographs in my book were taken on farmland. So farms are
Jesmond,
very important.
in a shaded wooded area where the
Mm.
ground flora is dominated by ivy succeeding to bramble, can you
Mm.
suggest what the best management approach might be to improve the same for butterflies?
Well, first of all, I would look at it to see what's there. I wouldn't go interfering with anything until I assess, is it actually being used? And it might be. So, for example, ivy on hedgerows is often used for breeding by the holly blue. So, first of all, decide and also see how well represented it is on your farm. So, if there's only a few patches of it, leave it. Don't interfere with it. But if it's dominating, it's okay to clear some areas and bring in light. Once light comes in, the character of vegetation will change. So, for example, you don't usually find bramble in the middle of a field because bramble likes to grow in areas of semi-shade. It doesn't really thrive in full sun. Ivy's the same. It doesn't like full sun. It likes semi-shade. So when you open up something to light, it changes the character of the vegetation. So if you clear an area and rake it, especially if you rake it back, using the raker on your tractor, that will have a big impact on the vegetation that will appear. And sometimes there'll be seed in that soil that hasn't germinated for decades that will suddenly appear and transform the area. Don't go buying wildflower seed in supermarkets or anything like that. Just please don't do it. It's a lot of it's very bogus. That I know I'm being blunt there, but that's the truth. It's often useless and sometimes it's even harmful. Let
Jesmond,
what's in the soil germinate.
are native species of butterfly in Ireland interfered with by the importation of native Irish butterflies, or by the importation of Irish butterfly or other butterflies, I suppose? And coming back to what you were talking about there, the planting of alien, plants not native to Ireland. Yeah, this person is a beekeeper and aware that the little black Irish honeybee is severely interfered with by hybridization and threatened non-natives. So just your comment from a butterfly point of view on hybridization and yeah.
My comment on that is this. Our species have evolved here over thousands of years in isolation from other populations. They have developed distinctive characteristics to cope with the environment we have here. So just to give you an example, the marsh artillery found in Ireland is darker than that found in the south of England. Its darker wing color helps it to absorb sunlight better in our cloudier, duller, wetter climate. So our species have evolved to cope with what they have to deal with in our environment. Some butterflies have 2 or 3 generations a year, and some butterflies have 1. If you introduce a native butterfly into Ireland from somewhere else where it has more than 1 generation a year and it starts hybridizing with ours, it might interfere with the brood structure of Irish butterflies. So, for example, in England in 1976, a butterfly called the checkered skipper became extinct, and they found a population of checkered skipper in northwest Scotland, and they were considering reintroducing of northwest Scotland. But having studied the species there, they found that butterfly feeds on purple moorgrass, whereas the old English populations didn't feed on purple moorgrass. They fed on other species of grass. So the nearest population match they found was in Belgium. So they had to take to reintroduce it, they had to take it from Belgium, not from Scotland. So not all populations are the same or have the same habitats or even the same food plant preferences. So interfering like that is generally regarded as quite dangerous.
Okay. I'll hand back to you for a minute while I get the last few questions, Cathal.
No bother, Catherine. Jesmond, there's a good few questions just about the ponds again. What's the best placement of ponds? And there's another kind of a question in there about a lot of our water quality mitigation put ponds and farms to capture nutrients, and we try and use them as a biodiverse area as well. But you're saying maybe not to do that. We need to have a pond for water quality and a pond for maybe the butterflies.
If your priority is nutrient capture, then having a pond at the bottom of a slope is a good idea. and it's not useless because it will support large stands of common nettle, because common nettles are greedy and love nutrients, and that will support some butterfly species, and it will support, say, red admiral, peacock, small tortoiseshell. So it's and about 22 of the larger moth species. So it's not useless by any means, and some of the mud that will develop in the pond will be rich in nutrients. And some of our native wildflowers are quite greedy. They like nutrient-rich soils. Oddly enough, like those soils can be really nutrient-rich, and you get species that actually like that. But but a pond shouldn't be heavily shaded. It should definitely not. It's okay to have a small number of trees scattered around a pond, because in very warm conditions, say, tadpoles will go to a shaded area. They won't want to be overheated. So it is important to have some shade in the pond. So sticking grey willow, cutting grey willow and literally sticking it in the ground, it'll grow. You don't need to do anything elaborate with it. It'll grow anywhere. Even a branch of grey willow stuck in the ground, even in the middle of summer, if you cut it, it'll grow. So a pond needs some shaded areas, but it should also be open to light as well. So it's a bit like the grassland management, a range of conditions.
So, Carl, can I just ask, because somebody was confused there about if you have a hedge running east-west, so you have a north side and a south side, is it the sunny side you want to put the pond on the south side of the hedge?
I would put it, I would put a pond in as open an area as I could, regardless of where the hedge is. I would put it in as open area as I could, and it's easy to see where the light is. I screwed up in my own garden, to be quite honest with you, Catherine. I put my pond, and I planted an area of woodlands to the south of it, and I've learned from bitter experience that wasn't a good idea. So they do need light, but aquatic animals need some shade too. They can't be overheated, and you probably lose oxygen from the pond if there's too much heat. So it's like, when I mentioned earlier about having a range of heights in the pond, like shallow edges and deeper centers. So that's because it's like a grassland, in the sense that different parts of the pond will cater for different species, or the same species at different phases of their life cycle. Yeah. So when they're younger, frog tadpoles are usually near the edges of the pond where it's warmer. But as they get older, they move towards deeper areas as well. And when they're metamorphosed and they're ready to leave, they go to the shallow areas and then depart as little froglets. So you do need a range of conditions in a pond in terms of both water depths, and having some shading influence as well. But a lot of the pond should be open to the sun.
Part one here on hedges, and I know you would appreciate that we don't want hedges to be cut roughly, or they may get disease but bearing that in mind, can you tell us more about keeping hedges under 2 meters and a 3-year rotation?
Yeah, the one way of dealing with the A shape is great, because by which I mean the capital A shape, the pyramid shape is great because you get more light on the hedge. And if you leave, the way sometimes, like especially blackthorn will grow out from a hedge because it grows on runners. If you leave little patches of that so that you get a scalloped edge on the hedge, that scalloping is very good, because you create more exposed and more sheltered conditions within the same hedgerow. So the way you go onto a stud farm and the hedgerow is all cut neat, it's square, it's flat. That's not a great shape for biodiversity at all. It might look like it's kind of the Stephen's Green approach. It's a gardening approach, really. It's not really a farming approach. It's a gardening approach. It's like topiary. That's not great for biodiversity. Most species like a range of conditions, with areas of the hedge growing very strongly with a fresh new burst of growth in spring where it's being coppiced or cut back, and others like the more mature, harder, stronger wood. So again, what you're doing is you're introducing diversity and variety into the structure of the hedge. You're not having a one-size-fits-all management. In terms of putting it,
your uniformity is bad.
Yeah, it's not great. No, it suits one or two things, but most species it doesn't suit.
Just a couple of quick questions. Any butterfly or moth expected to reach us, invasive alien species to watch out for? Is there anything we need to be?
The oak processionary moth is something that Department of Ag obsesses about. If it really does get here and really colonizes, there's very little they can do about it. It's probably getting here under its own steam, and they don't like it because the hairs on the caterpillars, they're an irritant, and they can be breathed in, and but it's colonizing parts of England, and it's just it's very hard to stop. You see, the climate change and the warming climate suits a lot of species in Northern Europe. It doesn't necessarily suit them in the south of Europe where it's getting too hot and too dry, but northern areas it actually suits them. So a lot of butterfly and moth population distributions are moving northwards, are shifting north in response to the warming climate. So, and they're also moving inland as well to areas that were previously too cool for them to exploit. So in the last, since 2000, the butterfly that a lot of people are noticing which has colonized Ireland, is the comma butterfly, which is a nettle feeder, and it's a harmless and attractive addition to our fauna. It's a very beautiful species. It overwinters as an adult butterfly. Has a lovely white comma mark on the underside of the wing. It's related to the small tortoiseshell and the peacock, and that's colonized Ireland. And climate change is believed to be driving the expansion in that species, because the caterpillar of that butterfly is solitary. It doesn't band together like the peacock, small tortoiseshell, and marsh tillary. So it was probably too cold for it in the past because they don't have this communal basking that helps them all heat up. But now it's spreading from southeast right across the country. So it's a lovely addition. We're getting new moth species recorded nearly every year now.
Lots of comments coming in supporting your message for let nature do its course and not going with the wildflowers. I think the number of promoting the statement "wildflowers are growing wild."
Yeah,
at the moment. So,
yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? Some of the most important plants for pollinators in Ireland are humble plants that you'd kind of not think of, like white clover, for example. Bramble is probably the best single plant for pollinators is bramble. White clover, our bete noire, the common ragwort, common knapweed, devil's bit scabious, hawkbit, common dandelion. These are plants that are really, very, very important for pollinators. And the study, there's a 2022 study, Irish-based study based on Teagasc in Ireland that supports that. And the study lists the 33 most important plants for pollinators, and all but 4 of them are native.
Unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today. We're coming towards the end of the webinar. There are loads of questions coming in, and thanks so much for everyone. And Catherine, you've done a great job in getting through those. But Jesmond, I think every second comment in the questions was well done. Need more Jesmonds. We need more contact with you and the farmers. So the presentation was excellent, and it kept coming through over and over again. So well done on that. And I certainly really enjoyed it and learned a lot from it. And I think several comments were coming in there that we just need more contact to get the relevant information, the correct information to the farmers, because if a farmer doesn't know what to do, they're not going to do it, and that's it. So we have to pull our socks up in that. But today has been a great start in it. Just want to thank you. Thanks a million again for that, Jesmond. Thanks a million, Catherine, for the questions.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Yvonne.
It was great to have you on. And Yvonne is there, Yvonne Maher in the background. She's pulling all the strings, making sure everything is working correctly. So thanks a million, Yvonne, for producing the show for us. And just to let people know as well, next week we can look forward to another excellent presentation with John Connolly from Trinity College Dublin. And we're going to learn all about Ireland's hidden peatlands. And that's not to be missed. And it'll be 9:30 next Friday morning again. And just, I suppose, to wish everybody a great weekend. We have St. Patrick's Day coming up. And I hope you have a lovely weekend. And that's it. Slán go fóill.